Brexit will bring some difficult times. Theresa May. Britain needs to be prepared for some difficult times ahead as it leaves the European Union, Prime Minister Theresa May has said. Speaking to the Andrew Marr Show in her first major interview since taking office, Mrs May warned Brexit would not be plain sailing for the UK. She said formal EU talks will not begin until 2017, but vowed the process would not be kicked into the long grass. Mrs May also ruled out a snap general election as the UK needs stability. The former Home Secretary became Prime Minister after David Cameron resigned in the wake of the EU referendum, with the Brexit process likely to dominate the first years of her premiership. Forging our own way. Speaking before traveling to China for the G20 summit, Mrs May said she would not pretend that leaving the Union would be plain sailing. Despite positive economic figures in the UK since the referendum, we have had some good figures and better figures than some had predicted would be the case. I'm not going to pretend that it's all going to be plain sailing. I think we must be prepared for the fact that there may be some difficult times ahead. But what I am is optimistic. She insisted the country would make a success of leaving the EU, saying she was also optimistic about new opportunities for Britain outside the EU. The Prime Minister said she wanted an independent Britain, forging our own way in the world. Asked about immigration, she said the referendum result had shown voters did not want free movement to continue in the way that it has done in the past. She said ministers were looking at options for new EU migration controls. People also want to see the job opportunities, to see the economic opportunities. And so getting a good deal in trade in goods and services is also obviously important for us, she added. The Prime Minister said she was very clear that she expected the status of British citizens in other EU countries to be guaranteed and would guarantee the status of EU citizens living here. Mrs May said the government would not trigger Article 50, which will begin the formal 2-year process of leaving the EU before the end of this year. However, she added, I'm very clear also that the British people don't want the issue of Article 50 being triggered just being kicked into the long grass because they want to know we're getting on with the job of putting Brexit into place and making a success of it. She said Brexit Minister David Davis will make a statement to the Commons this week on work the government has done over the summer. Taking advice. Asked about Scottish independence, the Prime Minister questioned whether voters in Scotland supported the prospect of a second referendum on independence. I think if you look at some of the results that are now coming out of polling in Scotland, they suggest that the Scottish people don't want there to be a second referendum, she said. Mrs May said the Scottish government would be fully involved and fully engaged in the Brexit discussions. She also promised a decision on the Hinkley Point nuclear power plant deal this month, saying she was still taking advice on the issue. I don't just come in and say, right, this is the position I take. I look at the evidence, I take the advice, I listen to that. That's what I'm still doing. Mrs May would not be drawn on the issue of grammar schools, saying the government would wait to hear recommendations from Education Secretary Justine Greening. She told the program she wanted to give pupils opportunities in life.